All right, welcome back to our training today. Today we're going to talk about race and culture and bias and stereotype. This is a hot topic and very important to discuss. So let's dive in for today. We are going to talk about four different topics, and under this content, first will be why here, why now? And second is your culture and your race, and let's do an investigation exploration. And we're going to talk about what is the bias and stereotypes within ourselves that we have learned so far, and what is the best approach and healthily and positively. Now, we all know in 2021, after the pandemic or even in the process of pandemic, that internet use has been increased dramatically. So with all kinds of internet and social media usage, and including video game as well, people are spending more and more time online, even for work and home and educations and even exercise. So you can see this is the perfect timing to talk about why right now. And also another factor is that diversity is a hot topic. It's very trendy. It's something that demanded from all kinds of walks and all kinds of settings, including work and home and society and community, online and offline. So this is the perfect timing to talk about what is race and culture. Now let's go back to a little old school geography right here when we are all in school, K-12, and we learned that there are so many continents around the world. They have North America, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and Australia, and also other continents too. Each continent has its unique cultures and have this populations and race that is very unique. Well, with the modern day of traveling, people are kind of mixed together and settle down in different countries and continents very differently than ever before in human history. But however, each continent still maintained some sort of its own unique culture and compared to other continents. Well, I'm not an expert at talking about other continents, so I'm just taking Chinese as example. For example, when you look at the central and northern China, you realize the language is Mandarin Chinese, is the national language, and also generally speaking, that people's facial features are stronger than the people in the south, and they have possibly stronger and more solid political influence as well because it's right next to the capital. And look at the southern areas, and they opened ports from the foreign countries historically. So from that perspective, and they have been receive a lot of more Western cultural influence. And also, a lot of Cantonese people live there. That's one of the major minority in the Chinese culture. So they have a pretty solid, colorful subculture traditions, including language and food and festivals. And of course, and food cultures is a great thing. Cantonese dishes and spread the food all around the globe because they are the first waves of immigrants to work and invest in other countries like in the United States and Europe. All right, let's look at the minority. Then that is one of the province among China has a little more residents of minorities. In China, roughly we have about 56 minorities and with 56 above and dialects, and which is not official language, but however they have been spoken by minorities. So you can see in a specific geographic areas, and you have several minorities and several dialects, and based on their residence areas, they probably have a different educational level compared to cities around the country. And because of their education level can be different, and their skill sets can be different, so that the social status or income level may be very different as well. So after knowing what's going on in China, that within one country you have so many different races and subcultures and festivals and languages and different things. Now, it's important to understand yourself, who you are as a person. Let's talk about a little bit. When we talk about race and cultures, we often think of this kind of perspective. First of all, colors, skin colors, most of people think of that. And what kind of nationalities that do you have? Some have one single nationality, some have dual, some have more. And also what kind of heritage. And you can think about your father's side, mother's side, and your grandparents, and either great grandparents. What kind of heritage do you have? And sometimes it's very interesting to find out stories and why your ancestors get married and how many heritage do you have in your blood. It's very interesting to find out. Religions, sometimes when you're living in one of the religions, they dominate with some of the religion's belief. So, for example, in China, we tend to find more Buddhism, Taoism, and also increasing percentage of Christianity. In Japan, dominantly will be Shintoism and Buddhism. So, in different countries, you may find different portions of religious belief. Festivals in each country and each race and culture has its own traditions for festivals and how to celebrate it. And even just for Christmas, different cultures celebrate it differently. And I have friends, family that they from Germany, that they celebrate Christmas. They have different traditions, like have to eat the orange and before opening the stocking. So that would be maybe different than most of people celebrate it. What kind of values and different cultures has different standing out values. If you think of like Mulan, the movie, the represent Chinese culture a little bit, and collectivism is always a highlight and devoted to families and being a good son, a good daughter, and good citizens, and being honest and be royal, and all kinds of the values that are socially accepted within that cultures and represent its own race and culture. So it's important to dive into to understand who are you, what kind of contents do you have within your race and your culture. Now, talking about you, and now we cannot ignore bias and stereotype. And each of us see others as a person differently sometimes. And I know people talk about racism and stuff these days. Now, let's face it, each one of us has our own bias and stereotype towards others. It may not be racism, but however, each one of us have our own understanding of how other races or how other cultures and other populations, other people groups would be like based on the information that we receive, the experience that we're growing up, or the medias that we have seen or watched online. So it's very natural. It's important to acknowledge that and instead of being ignorant or prideful about ourselves. Now, like I said, I could only talk about Chinese, and let's use it as another example. As a Chinese, and what do they look like? They look like Chinese. However, they do look a little differently than Japanese and Korean and Vietnamese and Thai and Europeans and things like that. So even within the Asia itself, they look a little differently. They may not seem very obvious to foreigners, but to Asian people, it's easier to identify who is Chinese, who is Japanese, and who is Korean. And what do they believe? Well, I just mentioned it, and then mostly they believe in Buddhism, Taoism, and also increasing population of Christianity. But even for Christianity, they also have like governmental churches and underground churches and different perspective and different teaching, things like that. What do they eat? If you have a little understanding of Chinese culture, you understand we have a southern cuisine and northern cuisine, and sometimes we have a central cuisine. They all taste very differently. The central cuisine tastes spicier, southern tastes a little sweeter, and a more natural cooking, have the original flavor of the food, and northern cooking tend to be a little heavier. So it's very different, very diverse. What do they speak? I just mentioned that we have over 56 dialects, also plus the national language. So it's a lot of languages. So people can not be able to understand each other if they don't speak the national language. Now, what do they good at? And a lot of people ask, like Chinese and good at math. So I would say something against this argument would say not necessarily we are good at math because we are Chinese, but because the government's policy, the educational system, we have learned a lot of maths growing up from elementary school. So we may obtain a lot more math knowledges and information compared to Western school system, but it does not mean we are good at it because our race or culture. Another thing I would like to go back in with the what do we eat? And sometimes people ask like, do Chinese eat dogs and cats? I could understand where they're coming from, but however, this is the old bias and stereotype. And in the history, I believe some people did eat cats and dogs because of hunger, those like that. However, not every Chinese eat cats and dogs, and even in modern days, it does not really happen. So, by saying that question, it represents lacking of information and having a bias and stereotypes. And those could be found in movies and medias. I think it's very important to acknowledge and be aware of that. Okay, now is your turn. Think about these people groups: Japanese, Indian, Russian, German, white, and black. And when we talk about it, different people may ring the different bells. For Japanese, that Asian people may ring the different bell than the Americans because of the World War II and how it happens and how it ends. Indian, and I think most people think about Indian would think about the property and how undeveloped the country is. But however, having Indian friends myself, that having a different perspective, and India can be very modern, and India also has increasing Christian belief there. God has worked a lot there. So depends on who you connected with or what kind of information you get, you have a different perspective to the same people group. For Russian, and the same thing, and Chinese may have a different perspective with American based on what they have the connection of friendship or even the fears of Cold Wars and the history time. The same goes to Germany. Then even right now, people think of Germany were related to the industrial development and also the World War II. So how history impacted on our perspective of this people group is very important to remember. White and black, when we think about white, we tend to think about Americans. However, American is much more diverse than just have whites. And being white is much more just being American. It could be European, it could be Australian, it could be other countries. So even within the black community, with my contacts with peoples and friends and in the black community, within them they even have different category of skin color, lighter brown, darker brown, and so it has different social status and stigma, bias and stereotype within the same black community towards different skin color, and it's very interesting to think about. So I would like you to be honest to yourself that when you think of those people groups, how much are you thinking are true? How much are you thinking are biased and stereotyped? And it's just a time to be honest to yourself and write down all of those impressions and be aware of it. Now, we have other issues right here. They are not often that we talk about or encounter. However, they bring up a very dynamic perspective and understanding of what race and culture is. So missionaries and militaries, overseas workers, third culture kids, interracial relationships, marriage, and even including adoption. All of them involves a complexity and dynamic perspective of race and culture. It does not just stay in one single race or culture anymore, but it's more like a mixture. You put a person into a very dynamic environment and grow this person as a dynamic person with multiple cultures and race exposure. But however, identity confusion can often be found within this people group. So it's much more important for them to figure out who they are. For example, I have family friends that the whole family have been in Japan for 20 years. So all their kids growing up as teenagers are consider themselves as Japanese. But however, they look like a Caucasian, European, or American. So when they come back to the US, it's very common to find out they interact with other American kids differently because they could not find anything in common besides what their skin color looked like. And this is a very complicated issue to find out who your identity is going to belong to. It's not just for a location, so where you live or your ancestors' bloodline, but more related to relational and experiential perspective level. So I hope you guys be able to think a little more about this issue and understand race and culture can be very, very deep and very, very dynamic. If you encounter those, it's important to give a second thought to think deeper about what is going on there. Now, the most important thing right here, everybody is a human being, and with God's grace and mercy, then we are Christians, and I believe that everybody is equal. So let's talk about how we can think and feel differently and healthily and positively. In the Bible, Revelations in chapter 7, verse 9, it said, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and people and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hand." Basically, that means in heaven, at the end of the day, all tribes, every nations and people groups and languages would be there. So it does not really matter what kind of skin colors we have or where we are coming from. God is for everybody. And if we can see everybody with the eyes and lens of God, that we will be able to see each other as human beings first and treat each other with respect and kindness that everybody should be treated. So that's the takeaway for today, and I hope you be more aware of yourself and how you think and how you feel and what kind of bias and stereotype that you have. But at the same time, we'll be able to understand God's grace and mercy extended to everybody on this planet, no matter where we're coming from and what kind of skin colors that we have. And at the end of the day, I hope that you will be able to love each other and treat each other in the way that you want to be treated, so that we have more peace on this earth. All right. Thank you very much for your joining of today's training. Hope you find it helpful and have a nice, blessed day. See you next time.